This one's called Peace, and it is on page number
194.
194. And feel free to join in, especially on the refrain, which is simply the word Amen. And we are all amateurs here, so don't feel either that we'll perform to a super professional standard or you need to perform to a super professional standard, but we will make it work.
With joy.
Peace gave us the mountains, peace gave us the sky. Nightly when starlight enfolds us, peace is its lullaby. Gave us the morning, peace gave us the sun, bird songs that call us to welcome, day and fresh labors begun. Peace gave us the seasons, peace gave us the rain, cold clouds that gather to bless us, mist hands that soothe away pain. Peace gave us our heart's love, peace gave us our smiles, rays of God's presence within us, light that all strife reconciles.
Sing Amen with us. Ready?
Oh, no, it's not this one. That's the other one. Yep. Yep.
Gather round, let joy sing out today. Dawn now is breaking, and the mountains say, it's only light can make the darkness run. Lift up your head, greet the rising sun. Greet the rising sun. Some people think to harvest happiness by weeding troubles, easing every stress. The trouble is that troubles never end. Get rid of one, and you face its friend. And you face its friend. It's in your heart. The songs of joy resound. You'll hear but
done. My name, if you didn't catch it from Kavita, is Nayaswami Pranaba. And both Sagar and I live, as she mentioned, at Ananda Village in Northern California. The teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda cover a vast panorama of possibilities. So you're all staying for several days, aren't you? So that we can cover all this? We'll let you go, don't worry. But one of the things that he brought was, or the several things that he brought that are primary, are to experience that divine consciousness within, to really explore what that is, not just in hearing about it, believing in it, affirming it, but actually the experience of it. And that weaves into all of the different aspects that he brought into the world. And one of them is spiritual communities. In his most famous book, The Autobiography of a Yogi. How many people have read that book, The Autobiography of a Yogi? So if I remember. It was published in 1946, and I think it's still classified as one of the top 10 of spiritual biographies in that entire time. But in it, and in the version we have at the back there on the table, he included an important message about world brotherhood colonies, was the phrase that he used about the idea of communities. Because most of us have lived in community from our birth. The first community that we've lived in is our family. It's a small version of of community, but it's a community. And then as we go into life further and further, we have the community of perhaps our childhood friends and going to school, our schoolmates. And then we go further and we have the community of where we work, and maybe producing our own community of family beyond that. But when you look at all those types of communities, they're real to us in a sense, but we haven't chosen to live in community in those settings, correct? That sort of happen. We're born into something, we go to wherever school we're living close to, and so forth. But because we've touched already, it's like that yearning for something more in life is very, very real to us. It isn't just, it's a good idea and we may enjoy it, but we're always striving. And indeed, I remember reading a survey of people, I don't know if it was just in America, but it said, and in this time you've all read about how loneliness has increased tremendously through the pandemic and even through these years now, that there is a sense of emptiness. Even amidst a lot of people, there is a real experience of being alone. And so the idea of community can take many forms, but the two words that are important are intentional and spiritual. Because if we bring intention into what we're exploring, then we're going to be engaged with it rather than having it happen to us. So much of life can seem like it's happening to us, that the pressures of life are being imposed on us, that the difficulties that we face, reading about, the economy in New Zealand, it's a challenging time right now for all of us, all of you, all of us that live in New Zealand. But what we're really looking for is something beyond that outer surface of what life gives us, and to find the deepest and deepening experience that really is going to be more fulfilling. It's like, in a sense, we're born with a destiny. And Paramhansa Yogananda, he came to America in 1920 from his homeland of India. And he was only 27 years old when he made that voyage from India to the east coast of America. But on that voyage, he gave a public talk, the first one he had given in English. That, of course, wasn't his mother tongue, and he didn't use it at all growing up in India. But then further, he took that topic matter that he shared with people on the boat ride to be his first book. And he called it The Science of Religion. So this is 1920. And you can see it forecasts really what was going to happen, this combination, this connection between science and spirituality. But in the book, he points out something really, really significant, that everyone is looking for happiness. Now, some of us may do it in interesting ways. That's an understatement. But indeed, behind every action, behind every part of our lives, that's what's our goal. That's what we're looking for. That's what we're trying to orient more and more of our life to. But what happens along the way is that we get caught by this thing or that thing. We have these desires, we have these attachments, and they take us off course. But the destiny of each one of us is to find fulfillment with happiness. Or actually put in the terms of what the teachings of yoga say, it's actually the experience of joy. And that's what Ananda means, joy. But that experience that's beyond the waves of this and that happening, becoming more of a focal point for us. And that's real to us, but it's not what the world at large deems to be its reality. I mean, if you've endeavored even to take a step with a spiritual awakening, the world crashes in and said, oh, that's hocus pocus or whatever. I just remember now, the first time I read Yogananda's autobiography of Yogi, I was 19, turning on 20, and I decided for various reasons, because I grew up in Canada, to hitchhike around Europe for the better part of a year by myself. And the two books I brought with me were very significant books. The first one was The Hitchhiker's Guide to Europe, and the second one was The Autobiography of a Yogi. And I flew from Canada, from Montreal to Glasgow in Scotland to start my journey. And I was staying in a youth hostel because I was young, 19, 20 years old. And I think the second evening I was there, the youth hostel had a common area with some sofas and nice chairs where people could spend time. And I decided I'd start reading the Autobiography of a Yogi that evening. And I was reading it and really already feeling that I'm touching parts of myself in reading this book. And these young American youths that were staying in the youth hostels came in. They saw me reading this book, and they said, "You're not reading that trash. Come on, you can't believe in that kind of stuff." And it was such a juxtaposition of polarization, you know. And it was like I just hugged the book close to me. And then I said, yeah, it's important to me. And they said, go ahead, you know. So, but what ended up happening on this trip was that it became a quasi-pilgrimage. I didn't know what a pilgrimage was at the time. I wasn't sure of anything like that. But it ended up happening that way, that everywhere I would go, I would meditate. Because I'd learned to meditate about a year and a half before. But I found myself always wrapped in some connection to spirituality, to religion. And I mean, I visited all the cathedrals, the basilicas, all those kind of things, and really found that from that inner experience of my own meditation, I could feel the experience of those places. And then my parents immigrated from Denmark to Canada in 1950. And I have an older brother and a sister that were born in Denmark, and then my other brother that's a year older and me were born in Canada. And when I was taking this trip, I knew I was going to spend Christmas with many of my relatives. Very few of my relatives moved to Canada with my father and mother. I think I had one aunt on one side and another aunt on the other side. And they both came from large families, so I had lots of cousins, lots of aunts and uncles. And so my mother, God bless her, she decided she would try to figure out where was the best place to have Christmas. Because I didn't know any of these relatives. And so she chose one of her sisters. Partly, I think, because this aunt had 2 girls that my age was in between the youngest and the oldest. So that's probably why my mother chose it. But what was interesting, because I don't know how real it is now, but back in the early 70s, it was still real that Denmark had as its designated state religion as the Lutheran Protestant denomination. And I don't know if you know about Lutherans, but that's Martin Luther's whole thing. But when I arrived and came to the home of my mother's sister and her 2 daughters, that they were Seventh-day Adventists. And I don't know if you have Seventh-day Adventists in New Zealand. So in America, they're vegetarians. And they developed this university called Loma Linda University. And a big part of what they did out of that university was produce some of the first mass-produced vegetarian food. Cans of vegetarian hamburgers, cans of vegetarian hot dogs and all that. And so my first meal with a meat-loving country was a vegetarian meal. And then the other thing that was interesting was that, like for many of us, Christmas is an important event and very spiritual. I was able to spend Christmas with these relatives, and it was like they were always asking me about what I was really doing. I had patched blue jeans and all sorts of things that represented the culture of that time in the early 1970s. But almost all my relatives would take me to places that I could meditate. Isn't that interesting? Whether it was, this church or abandoned a monastery or the sand dunes by the sea, all of them engineered some way where they would give me time to meditate. Now, I hadn't said anything about that. It was my mother's doing in that way. But what ended up happening, I felt this community of support. Now, not so much that I related to them as my family, because I didn't have any previous connection, but more that this was a community that was, in this case, supporting me in my continuing spiritual journey. Well, that continued after I left Denmark and hitchhiked my way down through Europe, that wherever I went, I would connect with other devotees, whether they were this path or that path, or just meditators. And so I would find myself in Munich in Germany, and the youth hostel I stayed at would have meditators. I was in Brussels in Belgium, and it was a huge dormitory youth hostel, one for men, one for women. And there were probably over 100 people in each dormitory, so a big group of people. But I would get up early, because it was pretty chaotic once everyone woke up and the noise level really increased. So I would get up and meditate on my bunk real early, and then sometimes I'd go back to sleep. But I wanted to get my meditation in. So after a few days of this, these 3 people, and also I had a Canadian flag in my backpack, and they said, "Oh, you're from Canada, and you meditate." Well, they had learned to meditate not that long before, and they were purchasing a Volkswagen van to travel around. They're tired of taking trains and other things. And so they said, "Do you want to join us?" Because they were going up from Belgium up to northern Germany into Denmark. And so I said, "Sure." So we would travel in this van and we'd meditate together twice a day. Well, can you imagine that coming out of the blue like that? And then I had some Jewish friends that were meditators back in Canada, and they were over in Israel, sightseeing and so forth. And I thought, well, I'm going to extend my trip and go over there. And I want to spend time on a kibbutz, again, a community. And kibbutzes in Israel have a range of what their focus is. Some are just more business-oriented, some are more religious-oriented. And the one I stayed in was a smaller one of 120 people that had a mixed kind of focus to it. And I was a volunteer there, a volunteer of helping them. And they had vineyards that they used as their main product that they were producing. But that first evening, I was thinking, now what do I do? Because when I started meditating, I also became a vegetarian, just like in Denmark. Now what do I do about food? Well, a quarter of the kibbutz community were vegetarians. So there was always a vegetarian option. But then what was interesting, I got this big room by myself to stay in, but they said, well, other volunteers will probably come and stay with you as they come. And after a few days, they said this fellow from Burgundy, France, was going to come because he grew up in a vineyard with his family, and he's going to come help the vineyard in the kibbutz. And I said, oh, you know. And so he came in, we were talking, and he said, by the way, I started meditating about 6 months ago. I said, me too. And then about a week or two later, these two boisterous men came into the room and said, we're from Tasmania, and we're volunteers here too. And talking to them, they had learned to meditate just a month before. And then there was a young woman that was living at the kibbutz that had learned to meditate recently. So we had this group of all of us, you know, in the middle of nowhere, meditating together. Now, the others didn't have as much persistence as I did with meditation, because we had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go out in the vineyards because it was super hot already. This is in February in Israel. And they kind of wanted to sleep right until they had to go. So they kind of let their meditation practice go. But isn't that amazing? That suddenly there's a community. There's a community within a community. The kibbutz itself is a community. But I found this community of, 4, 5, 6 other people suddenly in that experience. As we dedicate our lives with energy in the direction we really want, we'll attract others around us. We'll attract circumstances. We'll attract the right energies that support us. And sometimes that support, as we all know, is a test. It's not, oh, everything works out great, but sometimes that gift is the test before us because it draws us even more into focus to really live more what we want to do. And so community is always available to us, but the word intentional is important because we're focusing, we're bringing our efforts, our energy investment into being in community. And then spiritual community helps us focus in the way that really is nurturing the soul within us. So that kibbutz in Israel, for instance, it had a little bit of spiritual focus. But after leaving there, I thought, well, that was a good experiment, but that wasn't quite it. And then my oldest brother and his wife and another couple bought 200 acres of land. Do you use acres? Do you understand acres? So 200 acres is a fair amount of land. It's actually 1/4 the size of Ananda village in terms of land size. And it was just, there were about 7 of us in total that lived there. And I thought, this is great. Back to the land. There was no electricity. There was no running water. I remember there was a farmhouse that was there that my brother and his wife moved into, and then the other couple built it. And I thought, well, I'm going to build something. So I built a simple A-frame house. But we used no power tools. It was completely by hand. And I thought, well, this is it. Back to the land, engrossed in, building things, having, 1-acre garden, having all these things added together. This will be it. This is the community I really want. And yet, it didn't have that spiritual focus. And I felt my soul, my heart, wanting something that was more full of what I really search for. And so I moved back to the city that I moved from Winnipeg, Canada, and just started exploring things, getting together with other meditators for a while. But I hadn't learned the techniques of meditation that Paramhansa Yogananda taught. But I went to a meditation gathering with Transcendental Meditation. And one of the leaders now was one of the people that I'd started with. So we were familiar with each other. And my heart from that trip to Europe had started to open up. I felt more of that connection, not just that I was meditating, but I felt something deep there, yearning. And so at the end of this meeting, there was a chance for questions and answers, which we'll give you the opportunity for questions. And so I held my hand, I said, so what about devotion? And she was real good in her answer. She said, it's important, but you won't find it here. Because the focus was just on a meditation technique, which I never missed during that whole pilgrimage to Europe, twice a day meditation. So it was part of my life, but I knew there was something more. And because I'd read the autobiography of a yogi, step by step these things started to come together, that I thought, there's got to be something out there that's real. And by then I'd purchased the hardcover edition of the autobiography of a yogi because it was so much of a treasure to me. And I'd read it 3 or 4 times. Didn't read about any of the connection to the organization that Yogananda founded. I mean, literally, I had a veil over my eyes that didn't really read that part that said, by the way, Yogananda started this whole organization in Los Angeles. I had no connection with that. But one time, there was a metaphysical bookstore that opened up in my city. And I was looking around because I just wanted to tune into more things. And I saw on the top shelf these 5 photographs. No message, no description, no names, just these 5. And I said, I know you guys. I've read the autobiography of a yogi. And there was this book that caught my attention. And the title back then, so this is in 1977 probably, it said Cooperative Communities, How to Start Them and Why, by Swami Kriyananda. Now I didn't know anything about Ananda or Swami Kriyananda, and I was looking for something more tuned into Yogananda. So you can see my ignorance. So I flipped through the book without reading much and thinking, wow, these chapter headings are interesting. Starting a community, being part of a community. It wasn't until afterwards that I realized, oh, Swami Kriyananda was a direct disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda. And so I went to find the book. The bookstore had closed. And it was in the dead of a Winnipeg winter, which means cold and a lot of snow. And I didn't have a car, so I took public transportation way across the city because the book owners had taken all the books, boxed them up, put them in their basement. And they said, we're not sure we have that book, but come over and we'll check it out. So we went through about half a dozen boxes and we found the book. And I brought it home, read the book, and saw, oh, so there's programs available at this place. And then at the same time, like within days, I saw this little classified ad in one of the, I think it was East-West Journal, so the teachings of East and West, this journal, sort of like the Yoga Journal magazine. It said apprenticeships in spiritual community. And it had beekeeping, organic gardening, construction, all these different possibilities. And it said Nevada City, CA. You can phone or write. And so I thought, now remember, I'm from Canada, and Canadians actually learn American history fairly well, but I never understood the abbreviations, for the different states. So I thought, CA. I don't really want to go to the Carolinas. But of course it was California. And so when I found that out, I thought, yeah, I'm going to go to California. But that all converged. And then I was saying to some of you at lunch that I ended up taking a 64-hour bus trip from my home in Canada to Ananda in California. So and when I walked on the property, which is actually the entrance now to Ananda Village is where I walked into, but it wasn't the entrance back then in 1978. But I remember feeling, this is my home when I walked on the property. But I was clear in my recognition of that it wasn't the physical property that I was referring to when I felt that. It was the community of souls, of really feeling that inclination and desire to be in that just tremendous energy of communing with other people, communing with the divine. And it was a very real experience for me. And so I stayed a number of months, and then I went back to Canada. But it was just when Ananda was starting having meditation groups and centers. It had focused, because it started in 1969, and this was in 1978, so just 9 years after its formulation. It was then at a phase where Swami Kriyananda had toured the whole United States twice in 1978, and it came time to, let's explore putting energy into starting our centers, our groups. And so I went back and started a meditation group. And then I ended up moving to Ananda Village in 1981. But that group continued on for another 21 years with successive leadership, and then it just faded away. But again, another expression of community, just like what Ananda New Zealand is. It's an invitation for all of you to come today, but to come to really explore what community is. Not so much it's a physical community where people are living together, but the sense of community and sharing that connection with others. And that's very important for us. I think, as I said at the very beginning, the soul yearns for those more deeper connections with others. It's not enough just to make do with the people in your life, but to open up to, in a sense, the deeper experience of soul qualities from one another. And so the idea of community reaches into our hearts, whether we're going to live in a physical community, isn't as important as we feel that sense of, in a sense, communion with the divine with other people. You know, there's a word in the yoga teachings that says the word satsang, S-A-T-S-A-N-G, satsang. It's a Sanskrit word. And typically in groups like Ananda, we use it in a very casual way. We actually would call this a satsang. And that's true, it's appropriate. But the word actually means something a little bit more deeper. The word sat, S-A-T, means truth. It also means the divine. And sang, often it's sangha with another A at the end, H-A, means that fellowship, that connection with other people, that communion with other people. And so the two syllables together really mean that fellowship with truth and the divine. And how we explore that, and this is really a good point, it's the fellowship with God or truth with other truth seekers. Because that's ultimately what we're doing. We're seeking the deepest truth, not the passing whims of opinion, but those deeper, eternal, real, fulfilling truths that we seek. And so when you think about community in any aspect, but especially with spiritual intentional communities, in whatever form they manifest, is that there are a number of principles that really help us get on the right track. And one is, because often what will happen is that many communities in the past, at least in America, have started with purchasing land and then trying to make it work. I'm not aware of any community that's lasted long from that starting point, because the key ingredient is you and me. The living life force of people is what makes community. Finding property in the land. It's like this story here that Kavita shared with us, is that Kavita's home at the Narrows on the river is just across the road. And in the past when I've come and other non-teachers have come, we've had retreats like in Taupo or other places. But those places turned out not to be available. And then Kavita found out about here, Clearways. Now when I was last here 6 years ago, it was actually still training pilots to fly planes. And so it's designed everything as more for those larger groups. But suddenly, it was the place we could have this retreat. And it's worked out really, really amazingly well. You know, it has this conference rooms, the units that we stay in are comfortable. It's just great. But it's like that. If you have the energy of the collective people, then that will draw what the next steps will be. Because you can have the most incredible land with buildings on it, But unless you've got the heart and soul of people, it's just, something that will fade. It seems like it's great, but it needs that nurturing of the heart-soul connection. So one of the things that's really important is that communities really offer the possibility of being safe, of having trust, of really feeling the connections among one another that really is the sounding board for more possibilities to happen. Because if that can be a real important point, then we start building the magnetism beyond each individual doing their own thing into the group, the community itself. So the focus on having principles as the guide for us and not so much rules. Does that make sense? The difference between principles and rules? People can be badgered with rules to do something. But principles, they're the higher part of our consciousness bringing us into focus into this world around us. They guide us and make things possible in a deeper way for us. So there are several principles that we have at Ananda Village that are universal. One is that people are more important than things. Interesting concept. People are more important than things. Those things may include the best plans. Those things may involve a lot of the expression in forming the outer community. But if we're adhering to that people, you, me, are the greater emphasis, then we're nurturing that soul connection among one another. And I know, living at Ananda Village, because as I mentioned, I moved there in 1981, that gets tested, sometimes very severely, to adhere to that. That we're looking out for each person. The group dynamics have their place. We're going to give that emphasis. We're going to collectively do things. But alongside that is this emphasis of the individual. Not where the individual's ego is involved, because in a spiritual community, we're emphasizing more of the soul qualities. And that's what Yogananda brought, is this emphasis on the soul qualities. So that's the respect, that's that principle of people in their soul qualities are more important than things. Now granted, all of us still have egos. So we have to be real about that part of it. We can't just say, oh, that's just your ego. Well, it might well be, but it's their reality that we were talking about. And so the nurturing of that so that we can let the ego be a supportive part of who we are rather than the driving force into separation. Because the ego tends to separate and want to do what it's fed from the senses, from desires in that way. But really what we're doing when we say people are more important things, it's that nurturing, it's that respect, it's that safety of the soul being respected in other people. And it's dynamically challenging because you have everyone coming at a different point along that journey, feeding into it. And some people are very strong-willed in doing what they want to do, And so the other principle we have, which is equally important, is that where there is adherence to truth and right action, there is victory. It comes from a Hindi, I think it's a Hindi saying, Sanskrit, just Hindi, something like that. But this adherence to the truth and to right action gives us victory. It's an amazing concept, isn't it? Because the world encourages us maybe to do things underhanded or slipping around the edges or whatever it might be. But to adhere to truth and right action. Ananda, in its various forms, we have a special guest, Trisha, from Ananda, Palo Alto in California, so a separate community from Ananda Village. And we've been through many tests, haven't we, Trisha? in various ways. Lawsuits for various reasons, challenges from the regulatory bodies of the government, all these things. Neighbors that think we're just a cult and they want us out of the neighborhood or whatever it might be. They've been real tests. It's not like we, sweep them away. They're asking us, these tests, to adhere to truth and right action. And in one of the lawsuits that we were involved in, it was tremendously intense. But we always, the group that was leading, going forward with the lawyers on Ananda's part, they always brought up this point. No, we need to follow Dharma, that truth and right action. Dharma has to be how we're serving and leading the work. Even when it feels like if we did this, we'd probably get a better stance in court. Or if we did this, this would probably be a good attack on, someone on the opposing side. But we just always said, no. The point here, the victory is in the offering of that intention and that consciousness and that fulfillment. And we lost part of the lawsuit. We won most of it. But what we really won was the deepening of our hearts and soul doing the right thing. And that is contagious. That touches people beyond anything we could do that's a success outwardly. Because people can feel, wow, you went through this. My wife Parvati and I moved to Portland, Oregon just at the end of the lawsuit that Ananda was facing. And we went to a New Age fair. We had booths to display things, and Ananda had a booth, and we were there presenting programs and offering things. And we were there, and a lot of people come and talk to us about what Ananda is and all that. And this man came up and said, "So, you guys went through that lawsuit, eh? Pretty damaging, right? You guys kind of got caught." And I said, "No, actually, it was a real important learning lesson for us. We gained a whole lot from it. We understood who we really were in the test of searing fire of this test." And he said to me, "Wow, I come from another spiritual group. They were on the front page of the local paper 3 days in a row with a scandal." And he said the group tried to protect itself by circling the wagons, as they say in the Western movies. And he said, "Sounds like, though, you didn't take that approach. You really felt like you were opening and finding the true resolution rather than being dumped on." I said, "Yeah, that's what it felt like. We were tested. We had to search our souls. We had to really look at, is the opposing side revealing truths here?" And there were minor truths that we felt were helpful to us. But more, they revealed the tests that we needed to face for the development of Ananda at another level of integrity. I mean, that was always the case. We had integrity. But this allowed us in the fire of these extreme tests to see if that was real. You can say, "I really like something," but when it comes down to you have to put your energy into making something happen, it's like, nah, I think I'll go take a nap instead. We need to walk into it with, again, that sense of trust, openness, and then energy. Yogananda emphasized a lot about energy, not the electrical current energy, but the energy of who we are as a conscious being. And he talked about the greater we use our willingness, the greater the flow of energy. And the greater the flow of energy results in a greater magnetism. Like me going on this trip through Europe, I knew nothing about magnetism, but certainly it was happening. Some reason I was attracting these other meditators. Well, that's a reality. It's not a fairy tale. It's not something that's kind of out there as a dream. That's real to us in the moment. And community just allows us to be more connected in more stronger, integrated ways to have that happen. But the other thing that is really important, and that's a trend that's happened in the world and continues, is the really having simplicity. There's a saying of Yogananda's simple living and high thinking. Doesn't that resonate? You know, simple living. Don't let the world control you because you have a desire for that or that, you know, whatever. I don't know about you, but a lot of us during the pandemic cleared a lot out of our houses. You know, we had the time, and there was all this stuff that we haven't looked at in 10 years. Let's go out. For Parvati and myself, it's books. My wife and I have a lot of Ananda books, a lot of Yogananda books and spiritual books, and I think we have 5 bookcases in a very small house. So just last week, Parvati, my wife, took, I think it was 120 books to the Goodwill store locally. And because we want to live more simple. A lot of the books we gave to other Ananda people so that they could enjoy the benefit of that as well. But the idea that simple living, don't get complex. You know, we end up feeling that we're under the thumb of all our possessions. Isn't that true? You know, for instance, with technology, it's so easy to be overrun, isn't it? I mean, how many people's main posture in life is, you know, they're looking down at their phone and, you know, they're texting. But that's the common posture. I mean, it isn't as if you see that occasionally. You see that all the time. But you can see that technology can easily do the opposite of community. And that's what we're finding everywhere, is that isolation and loneliness has increased by just tangential leaps in that way. But we can still use that technology and be simple. We don't have to have it control us. We can use it. I remember when I first came to Nanda, Swami Kriyananda, how he wrote his books. He's written over 150 books. He left his body, by the way, in 2013. So when I say he's written, it's present tense because I think a lot of us relate to him still being with us in our hearts. But he used to, on a typewriter. Actually, he would write sometimes longhand and then type on a typewriter. So when the first word processors came in, he was one of the first people to get one to write his books. Because he said, this helps me become more simple in this task. So we know technology has that potential on all levels. But we need to be the ones cooperating and really driving it rather than it driving us. I mean, we have this super sophisticated database at Ananda Village. And we got it before the pandemic hit. I'm barely getting to the point where I don't have to look at my cheat notes to do a lot of the entry and stuff like that, because we have layer and layer and layer of input and data and all that. But I thought, I'm just going to be simple and do what I can. I'll use notes when I need to. Because some of the activities I deal with are occasional. And you know what it's like when it's occasional. Your memory doesn't really track it. It's just bouncing off and you're forgetting it. But within the community, we have all these people that are more knowledgeable. So all I have to do is make sure I connect with the pieces that work for me. So we have, of course, like everyone, a full IT department, a full tech department. We have Sagar as part of the Dynamic Online with Ananda program. He and another fellow Jitendra are the directors of that, the managers of that. But we have all these things. And I mean, I kind of have to put my blinders off when these guys start talking about some of the things that they're doing behind the scenes for the online world. Because I have enough on my plate to take care of. But a community allows us to nurture that we can use things like the new innovations of technology and be helped by them. But we have to be aware of it. You know, one of the legislators in the state of California proposed a bill, interesting bill for California, that it said to guarantee the rights of employees that they need not respond to communications after work hours. Because you know what that's like. That isn't what's happening. It's 24/7. When I was here the first time in 2016, I brought a few Ananda people just as Sagar is with me. But one of them was running our tech department. This is Naba. And he gave a workshop. And it was on unplugging. Taking the conscious choice to unplug from technology. And Kavita remembers this, that there were a bunch of school teachers that came to the program, and they were just burned out from being on 24/7, either from parents or the admin people or the kids or the other teachers. And they were just saying, what can we do about this? Well, he helped them find ways to produce a buffer zone, kind of a separation, so that they could find their own community without the pressure of technology. And so he said things like, make sure every day you take a walk around trees and gardens. Just take a break and do that. And that's been proven that really nurtures that deeper, more connected, fulfilling aspect of who we are. But so community allows us to shift from being driven by things because we have a lot of other truth-seeking souls that can either buffer those tensions or provide solutions in different ways. So when we think about this idea of simple living, high thinking, the high thinking is even more important than the simple living. High thinking. What does that mean to you? What would you use as a synonym or a description of high thinking? Anyone? Higher consciousness. Higher consciousness. Anything else? Wisdom. So the orientation is to lift the experience. Life itself can so easily do the opposite and drag us down. And literally that word, drag, you feel your life is dragged, you're being dragged around, it's got friction because it's in that downward mode. But if we can lift the energy, and that's the idea of consciousness and that experience is lifted, that takes energy. And when the energy is there, coordinated with that intention and focus of lifting our consciousness, then we have more certainty in our experience. It may not change the world around us, but it does to some degree. I was saying this the other day, I don't know when these days all merge together, but that there was a study a long time ago that on meditation, a research study, that said this curious thing, that meditation doesn't get rid of stress. And we were all hoping, well, wait a minute, that's part of why I meditate, and get rid of stress. But then they fleshed out what that meaning was a little bit more. It was that you can't change the stressors in the world around you. They're going to happen. One example they used in the study was rush hour traffic. That's going to happen. It's going to be a reality. You meditating probably isn't going to affect rush hour traffic. So that stressor is there. But what meditation does, it changes the impact of stress. Isn't that interesting? It's an important distinction. That means you and I have complete control over how our life is. Whether we allow stress to impact us or not is completely in our hands, or more aptly put, in our consciousness. Isn't that interesting, though? That you have the ability to choose. So if you have an environment, i.e. a community, then you're supporting always that direction of being able to choose how stress impacts you. Because in effect, what the study also revealed about stress was stress is an opportunity. It actually helps us mature and grow, having those challenging tests. If we didn't have challenges and tests, we'd be lukewarm. And we want to be alive in every fiber of our being. We want to be engaged in life, not having it secondarily. You know, I remember listening to, there's this wonderful radio show in America with the National Public Radio. It's called Science Friday. So every Friday they have this wonderful show on about science, and it's just really revealing. And this one time I was driving around, so I had the radio on to this station, and they were interviewing this research scientist, and I missed the beginning of it, but he was talking about, he said this very bold statement, he said from the research, that the second or third time that you eat a food that you either really, really like or really, really dislike, it's a memory. It's not a direct experience. Meaning it's vicarious. You know what the word vicarious means? In association with, not direct experience. Isn't that mind-blowing? It's so powerful what happens in the brain that you set in motion something that's strong, whether a positive or negative, that will kick into gear before you even know what's happening. But you know what changes that? Your environment, of who you are with, and meditation. You have the key to unlock always being positive and creative and constructive in how you're handling life. Those are pretty powerful things to have in our tool bag of living. They're not just wishes. They're realities that we take step by step in experience with. So I want to cover a few more things here, and then I'll let Sagar talk. But one of the things is to really feel that community of any sort, whether it's living together physically in a physical property, or having what Ananda New Zealand has, which is a community of coming together at times, is that community really has as one of its pillars that the individuals involved are really catalysts for change. Because change is always happening. And where we're not flowing with change, we become static. And we start to lose the experience of life. Again, we step back, and that's fine for short periods of time that we're pausing. But what we're really doing is we're allowing ourselves to be catalysts. Not even if we may not say words about it, but our whole being is like the sunshine. Here's a curious question. How many of you have ever read Aesop's fables? Do you know what they are? I grew up with them, but they're not very common these days, are they? Obviously. You see? So they're fables from previous ages, obviously. But one of the ones I remember is that it's the sun and the wind, and they're up, in the sky. And the wind is really restless, obviously. And he says to the sun, let's have a contest. See that man down there with his overcoat on? Let's see who can quickly make that man take off his coat. And the wind, being full of himself, goes first. And the sun hides behind a cloud. And the wind huffs and puffs. And guess what the man does? He wraps the coat even tighter around himself. And then the wind blows out of air. And he says, okay, you can go, sun, but you're not going to have any more success than I had. And the sun just peeks out from the clouds, and the man takes his coat off. And that's what community allows us to do. That it's not a put-up job, a pretend job. We're actually there opening up to those possibilities. So part of community is having leadership that's supportive, not controlling. So we have a lot of effort into this experience of opening up, letting people really come into that experience of supportive leadership, both on the receiving end, but also on that giving end. That leadership that supports others. Again, remember, people are more important than things. Supportive leadership nurtures that in a practical, pragmatic way. It makes it real for people to feel, I can do this. This is possible. What can I do more of in this way? And so these kind of things really help us in that nurturing sense, not only for us personally, because in a way, there's more to us than just us. I don't know if we have the logo of Ananda somewhere.
It's on many people's necklaces.
Yeah. But the logo of Ananda came to Swami Kriyananda. Here's one. So I'll pass this around, but it's a circle, but inside the circle, there are soft sloping lines up, and those represent a mountain peak. But they're not hard lines. They're not hard straight lines. They're soft lines. And that symbolizes our hope, our aspirations of lifting up, of drawing to a higher experience rather than the mundane world we live in. But it's connected to the mundane world at the bottom. But as it reaches its peak there, it starts soaring up for itself. And then it realizes, but it's not just for me that this is happening. This is for me to share this as well. So that sweep up comes around and embraces others. And then as it embraces others, it has even more energy and focus, and it lifts even higher. And then in that blessing, there's a symbol of a bird coming down, just like the wings of a bird coming down to the mountain peak. And so the two meet. And that idea that we are really fulfilled when we include others in our experience. That it's not just, I'm going to get this for myself. But here you can look at this, pass it around. But the idea is that involving other people, whether they're in our so-called community or others. And so one of the ways that community functions for Ananda is that we invest a fair amount of focus and time in sending healing prayers to others. It's a very dynamic part of what community is. Again, whether you live together or come together like Ananda New Zealand. But that takes us out of a selfish, egoic perspective into a more universal soul perspective. And this becomes very real. It's because we've had numerous, thousands of examples of healing prayers having an effect. And the interesting thing with healing prayers that Yogananda gave to us, it isn't directed to the outcome in terms of, for instance, the physical healing. It's directed, so we're praying for people to be receptive to healing energy. Energy is intelligent and will find its way. So what we're doing is not saying this person has this disease or this condition and we want them to be rid of that. What we're doing in the healing prayers is we're wrapping an aura of that blessing, that energy, so that their souls and their whole being be receptive to finding the right steps to take in that experience. It may come with advice to do this or that, but it's interesting because community, when you start really involving things like prayer, that's very focused and real, as well as meditation that really nurtures the soul as well as the community, then so much is available for us to interact with the world around us in that positive way. We're nurturing without saying, I am nurturing. We're nurturing because it's the essence of our being with others in that experience. And when we do that, then we ourselves are fulfilled in that experience, like that logo. We're able to share, and then it's a greater fulfillment for us from that sharing and that experience of community. So I want to have Sagar come up and share some aspects.
So maybe I'll just be brief if I know how to be brief, which I'm not necessarily good at. It was funny. I went first. We had a Kriya Yoga retreat, and I went first, and I think I consumed some of Pranaba's talking time. So I'm happy to have just some concluding thoughts on what Nayaswami Pranaba said. Oftentimes I have found that I end up sometimes talking about things that I was not going to talk about. And as I was listening to Nayaswami Pranaba basically covering a lot of what I thought I would talk about, I said, I better find something to talk about which will be novel. And the thought that comes to my mind is this is a part of today's world. Science is, new understanding is. And one of the biggest things that the world thrives on, because see, communities, Swami Kriyananda, our founder, used many adjectives for it. Sometimes he called them spiritual communities. Sometimes he called them intentional communities. Yet other times he called them cooperative communities. And that word cooperation is something that I thought I could talk about a little more, because this world is more based on competition, not so much on cooperation. And oftentimes that is justified to a great degree by using one of the analogies or statements from Darwin, survival of the fittest, because those of you who have studied some evolution know this is how it is said that better and better species thrive and come forth. Now, I know Arun studied a lot of these things, and probably he'll tell me later that there was a different way to interpret Darwin's statements, and that will be fun to talk. Arun's Kavita's husband, he is sort of the co-host by default for Ananda New Zealand, because Kavita keeps inviting us and others to her home, and he is very generous with his time, and their daughter, Veda is here also. She was helping prep lunch for us today. So it's a team effort, very good community right there. But coming back, I remember the first time a great yogi from India, Swami Vivekananda, some of you might have heard his name, he said something very interesting. He said that a lot of the things that apply to natural processes get inverted when they come to human kingdom, to humankind. And he said humans thrive better with cooperation and support and nurturing than with brute competition. I'll give you a fun examples of this. Think about this. I mean, where do you find more, let's say, women who have achieved, because this is a big thing in today's world, because there hasn't been parity historically between men and women. There has been a movement to bring that parity about. But where do you find more of that parity coming across? Is it in countries where women's rights are squelched? Survival of the fittest, the more the challenges, the better somebody thrives? Or in countries where legislation and thought processes nurture that growth? And I would suspect it's in the later situation. Another example, which I've always found interesting, is there isn't a Nobel Prize for dictatorship, but there is a Nobel Prize for peace. How does that add up with survival of the fittest? Because the example that is given is Tiger A ate Tiger B, and Tiger A was stronger, so he passed his genes to the next generation, and so on and so forth. But humans essentially are not that kind of animals. There is more to us than meets the eye. Again, and there's many other examples you'll see. Countries which nurture their athletes produce the best athletes, not countries which don't have the infrastructure to support athleticism. It's the same with education also. Now, the reason I am saying this is communities like Ananda tend to be cooperative. Now, cooperative does not mean not having challenges. Many of you who have been in educational sectors know that it's good to challenge, let's say, students or children, but from a compassionate viewpoint, that this challenge will bring forth a new aspect of a particular individual. It will make them more balanced, more centered, more rounded. You challenge somebody into compassion or being better athlete, but it's not the kind that pits one against the other. The beauty of cooperative communities, intentional communities, is because sometimes we talk a lot about the peace and the calmness and the harmony, but Nayaswami Pranaba very wisely talked about the challenges. And believe me, we get placed in just the challenging situations we might not want, but which are good for us. But we get supported through that process. This is a way for individuals to be nurtured and to thrive. A lot of the loneliness situation does not come because human population is declining. It's not like, oh my God, there's only 1 million of us left. Now there's only 500,000 of us left. There's no people around us to find, to talk to, and that's why we are lonely. No, I mean, every city you point to, the population is increasing, and yet people are feeling lonely. I come from Mumbai, where there's 30 million people in that small city. It's the size of Canada. 30 million people is the population of Canada. All of Canada compressed into one small city. And yet loneliness prevails there also, even though people live in skyscrapers with hundreds or 500s of people in one building. What causes that loneliness? It's the attitude of society right now, that intense competition, judgment, criticism, feeling that we are not good enough. All those things are what we are trying to change, and communities, if they are a wise community, a community for the sake of being a community might not be the right solution, but a wise community can help us to realize that we are here for two reasons. What are the two reasons we are here for? Yogananda used to say, we were put here for our education and for our entertainment. And by entertainment doesn't mean necessarily going to the next Spider-Man movie or whichever movie you see, which you can see also, but realizing that this is an opportunity for all of us to grow and thrive together. A story I was telling somebody, I forget whom I was telling this to, but was a story I heard from India. We have an immigrant community, which is now very much Indian. This was many centuries ago. They are called the Parsis. I don't know if some of you here are Parsis, but they came from Persia when the Islamic conquest happened. A few of them traveled over the sea and came to the western coast of India, to Gujarat. And they went to the king and said, we want to settle here. And the king, they couldn't talk because they had different languages. And the king got his minister to bring this big pail of milk, an empty pail. And he brought a big container of milk and he started asking the minister to fill this pail up until it was full to the brim. And he showed this pail to the Parsis and pointed out to them. Basically, he was saying, look, we are maxed out. We can't integrate more people. If we add more milk to this, it's going to overflow. There won't be enough for everybody. But the Parsi community were very smart. They asked the same minister to get some sugar. And they put those sugar crystals in that milk. And they're saying, what they were saying was, we won't max you out, we'll sweeten what you have already. We'll add our joy, our sweetness to the experience you have. And the king liked that answer so much that he allowed them to settle in India. And to this day, that's exactly what that community really has done. It's a fantastic group of people, very well integrated. They have their individual religion still. They reach the topmost echelons of philanthropy, government, some of the biggest educational institutes in India. The Tatas, if you have heard, the company, they are from Parsi heritage. But this is what Yogananda was talking about. When taken with the right attitude, we can make this world a better place for ourselves, for others. We can learn from each other, not just from ourselves. And we can help others learn also. This is the reason Yogananda used to say small communities are the pattern of the world in the time to come, because people will realize all these challenges, nervousness, health, you name it, all of it comes because we seek our sense of completeness somewhere out there. And a good community is not about finding our sense of completeness out there in that community. That might seem surprising, but it strains us to find that completeness within us also. There is no other reason Nayaswami Pranaba mentioned meditation so often as a part of Ananda's lifestyle, because if all it was is an outer community where we find our tribe, as the word goes, at least in the US, people of similar interests, we wouldn't need meditation. But everything, life is a journey to self-discovery, Swami Kriyananda used to say. And by discovering our true nature, we discover what the nature of all creation is and the purpose of all creation is and our place in that creation also. So at Ananda village, I have found myself being put in situations. Can I get some water? I have found myself being put in situations lovingly because Pranaba is also my manager and I have others where I might need to make some quote unquote attitude adjustments to survive and to thrive. And isn't it a joy if we are put in those situations which will cause us to grow into a better human being with all the support and the strictness? Sometimes the strictness is necessary. This is one of the things here at New Zealand, I suspect. You all come here, I come here as a guest, and we see the finished product. All the chairs are set here, all the altar is set here, and the mics all working. But if you are really not just a visitor to a community, but a part of making it work, you see you get pushed. Your buttons get pushed. But as you work through this experience, you see that those buttons start disappearing so that there's no button left to be pushed. It's not so much about telling people, don't push my buttons, but to reach that state where we are completely well integrated. It all comes down to transforming our understanding. And I remember Yogananda, when he first went to New York, he gave a talk. And one of the wealthiest people in New York came up to him later. This was Alvin Hunsicker, who was president of Standard Textiles, a very big company at that time. And he asked Yogananda a question. He said, this was a wonderful talk. But you see, I'm already disgustingly healthy and disgustingly wealthy. What can your teachings give me? And Yogananda immediately said, are you disgustingly happy? And Alvin Hunsicker had the humility to say, no, sir, I'm not. In fact, it's a scientific fact, I think, that the more people have, the less happy they often tend to be, because there is a show of happiness. It's very easy to show off to others as if you're wealthy. And but inside often there is an emptiness that comes because we have never realized where true wealth comes from, which is it's a state of consciousness. So Yogananda's teachings helped this person, Alvin Hunsicker, to reach that state. In fact, he left his body in a state of great joy. Yogananda narrated that story often. And Swami used to say, death is the final exam, because if you have lived life right and realized life's lessons, then death is as joyful, if not more so. It's like graduation day. You take on, your next role, your next responsibility. The yogis, let me just say this, tend to be very free when talking about death, because the practice of meditation pulverizes the fear of death. That's one thing I've realized more and more strongly through my own little practice. So if I mention death, please don't feel weirded out or something like that. Communities are far more than being in harmony with outer nature. It's primarily also about realizing our true nature is spirit. And as Nayaswami Pranaba said, it's not just about simple living, but primarily about high thinking. And as he was saying that, I was reminded of a story from Yogananda's life. When he was in the year 1950 or 51, a few months before he left his body, somebody gifted him a Cadillac. And Yogananda would just laugh at it. He would say, this is the hangman's dinner. When if you are sentenced to be hung, on the day before, you can order any meal you like. That's the last meal, and they'll make it for you. And Yogananda would say, Divine Mother has told me it's about time to go. My work in this lifetime is finished. And so this is my hangman's dinner. But there was a new monk who had come all the way from Germany. He had read that same book, Autobiography of a Yogi. And he used to say he read it even though he did not know how to read English. That was the greatest miracle of his life. He never figured out how. But it was only available in English. He read it. He came to Yogananda. And sure enough, one day he sees his guru driving in a Cadillac. The Guru is a Swami, he's renounced everything, and Yogananda, he started thinking in his mind, that's no way for a renunciate to live. And he just thought that, he didn't say that to anybody. And the car was going out of the gates for a drive, suddenly stopped, and then it reversed back, right where this monk was standing. And the window rolled in. Yogananda was in the passenger seat. He had probably asked the driver to reverse back. And he simply looked with a big smile at this monk and said, don't worry, Henry. I possess this car. This car does not possess me. And he rolled the window up. He had reached that state. See, he had reached that state. Now, that is the level of consciousness Ananda is supposed to help each one of us reach. That is the level of consciousness that life is supposed to help each one of us reach. And that is the goal we are striving towards. It's easier to strive to that goal with a support of a community. It's harder to strive towards that goal without a community, and it's even harder to strive to that goal if you are living in an environment that militates against that direction. How many people here are good at swimming? I'm not, but I'm assuming some of you are. One of the principles of swimming, if I know it right, is that the current always wins. You can swim against the current for a little while, but after some time, you see that you tire out and you get pulled by the current in the direction it's headed. You have to enter a different current, or you have to get out of that current and find a different way. So for most of us, if our ideals, our goals are headed in a certain direction, freedom, inner freedom, joy, light, supportiveness, and we are placed in an environment where everything is going in the other direction, we can struggle against that influence for a while, but then we tire out. We see that 80% of our energy is expended in trying to maintain the status quo and not going further down in a direction that we didn't want to go. So being in a current of energy, in a flow of energy that supports us is very important. The way Yogananda would put it is delightful analogy. He had a very nice way of giving analogies that people could really understand. And he used to say, this is something I was sharing with a small group of people in Rotorua when we were doing a class. He said, suppose you take a cloak or a jacket and you leave it in a room where people are smoking. It doesn't matter whether you smoked or not. It doesn't matter whether you are anti-smoking or pro-smoking or not. When you put that cloak back on, you will smell of smoke. But if you take that same cloak and put it in a room where there is flowers, roses, fragrant roses, doesn't matter whether you like roses, whether you have rose plants, whether you bought the roses or not, when you put that cloak back on, you'll have the fragrance of roses. And then Yogananda would say, be around human roses. And so this is the purpose also of living in a community, that every day when you wake up, when you see people, you have friends who can uplift your consciousness. The more we can do that, knowingly or unknowingly, we start changing. Like I said, that analogy is so powerful because it doesn't matter whether you like roses or not. You will smell of roses. And here, if you come to a place like Ananda Village, you are there for enough amount of time with openness, with sincerity. When you leave, you will see you have changed for the better. And sometimes you'll never leave. Which is what has happened with Nayaswami Pranaba. He probably came in 1978. We sometimes joke, he's from Canada, and we have these Canadian geese, which are supposed to be migratory birds, but they never leave. Every day you see more and more of them. So we have many people from Canada who are living, and it's wonderful because everybody adds their particular flavor, their particular skill, making it a vibrant community. When a community reaches a certain size, it becomes very easy to find all the things you need within the community. At Ananda Village, we have our own water department, our own road department, our own telephone department. We have our own website or internet manager. We have our own retreat space. We have our own blacksmith. We have our own metal worker, you name it, or our own school. And people come together, and oftentimes they bring their joy, their light to an already bright community. So, I say it's worth finding one. The search for spiritual communities has to start within. So, what is the purpose of your life? That's the first question to ask before searching for a spiritual community. And once you know what that purpose of your life is to be around people or a group of people or help create a group of people, a small community that nurtures those ideals. If you are looking for something that's spiritual, Ananda here or in New Zealand is an option. There are many other paths also. Now, I said that Swami used many adjectives when he talked about communities. And one of them, like the book that Nayaswami Pranaba talked about, was cooperative communities, how to start them and why. And the subtitle was The Small Community Solution, if I remember right. And then you go to ananda.org and you read what it says. Ananda is a community of tens of thousands of people from all over the world who are united in their ideal of simple living, high thinking, and their quest for self-realization. But this is exactly what Yogananda wrote in Autobiography of a Yogi. In the last chapter, he said, a small community which is harmonious is empowered to send out vibrations that have effect far beyond its physical locale. And so Ananda did start out as Ananda Village with a few hundred people. And we didn't go and convert people by sword or by anything else. We simply welcomed people wherever people invited us. We went there, and by we, I'm taking far too much credit. They went there. I've only been here 10 years. They came to India, and I was interested in these teachings. So, and then as a result of that, today this community, not as one organization, but a fellowship of friends. Swami's first name for Ananda was Fellowship of Inner Communion, because it's fellowship also, but it's about inner communion as well. It's inside out, outside in, both things. And one of the pitfalls, Swamiji said, if I may say that, of a community is when it becomes too communal, when it prevents individuals from being individuals, when it practices what he called an intense form of togetherness, because individuals are individuals. We are different in many ways. Yogananda said every soul was created as an individualized spark of divinity. It manifests divinity in its own unique way. Nobody else will be like any other creation. And we have to find a way to honor that, to allow that to nurture. And I want to close sort of by at least by reading this quote, which was the tagline. Here I'm doing the same thing that Nayaswami Pranaba was talking about. I like this because this was the quote, the tagline for which my research advisor, when I used to study engineering, his email address had this as his signature, not a tagline. This was from Margaret Mead. I don't know if you know her. She was a very well-respected anthropologist. She said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." So, as I mentioned this, again, let me come back to reminding people that community is not about herd mentality, because sometimes that's what we take away from that word. And the example Yogananda would give often from his life was, he said one day he had heard about this community which was prospering beautifully. It had just started, until a few days or a month later, he heard they just fought tooth and nail and fell apart or splintered or whatever. And then Yogananda got talking to one of their leaders and said, "What happened?" Says, yeah, I mean, this big thing came up and, everything blew up. Says, what happened? Well, half the community wanted to have tapioca pudding for dessert, and the other half wanted rice pudding, and we couldn't agree, so we split up. And Yogananda said, why didn't you have both? And they said, oh, we never thought of that, And again, because he says so, it probably really happened. But this has often been something we have been very good at Ananda, that as Pranaba said, there aren't too many rules. We have certain core principles, because without that, the community itself would not exist. But other than that, Ananda doesn't really have a form. Swami used to be asked, where do you see Ananda 20 years down the line, 50 years down the line? And he would say, I don't know. All I am making sure is that the energy is right. And it's headed in the right direction. And it will be ever new. Ananda will change on the physical plane, its manifestation, but the energy doesn't have to. And if Ananda's energy changes, another community will come up. Nothing is permanent. But the souls who are benefited from being in a community like Ananda, those benefits to those souls are permanent. We change, we transform, and we get closer to our goal, which is self-realization. So there's a few minutes left, and maybe this is time for questions, and then we'll end with a song that Swami Kriyananda wrote. The two songs we sang were written by him, and the third one also, I think you'll enjoy. It's our community quote-unquote anthem. So any questions? And Pranaba can come up also, if there are questions, or maybe I can sit down.
You see, we play with each other. Yeah, that was an interesting conversation we had. And that's true. That's what Karen is sharing, is how Ananda does really operate. It's really looking at, we meditate in different groups in the community, and we have chances to have meditations at our workplace. The pandemic changed a lot of that. And we're sort of getting into a groove again. But at least once a week, what I do, for instance, as Sagar referred to, I manage all of our Sangha outreach departments, of which Sagar is a key component in the online part. But part of my job, what I do is I walk around and make sure that everyone takes their week of seclusion every year that we pay them for. So we pay them vacation time, but we pay them for a week of taking an inward seclusion. And so part of what I do is I make sure they're doing that. Not out of pressure, but out of that invitation that this is important not only for you, but for the rest of us, that you do that. And so we understand our work not so much with that word work, although we work hard, but we use the word seva, S-E-V-A, which means selfless service. And we operate that way, as Karen was saying, we do get paid, because we don't run, as Sagar referred to, as a communal system. We don't share everything in that way. People work for wages, they pay rent on the houses they live in, they buy groceries at our store, which is called Master's Market, after Yogananda, Master's Market. But we're really serving. And in terms of compensation, we kind of turned it upside down, is what you're saying, because I was counting after we had our discussion that of the 35 people or so in my realm, over half of them make more money than I do, and I'm the manager of all that. Because we're looking at the needs of people, not as merit of what you can do and your value. Your value is a soul. And we put a lot of emphasis on that and make it very practical. We see what are the needs of the people here. If they have a family, they should have more compensation. If they're single, they should have more compensation. And we work really from the principle, when our meetings come together, maybe some of us are like me, is that when I first came to Ananda, that I moved there in 1981, I abhorred meetings. I really did not appreciate meetings. Most of my time is in those settings right now. But years ago, I shifted the word from meetings to, remember when I talked about the word satsang? So that's my perspective. And many of the people I serve with have that same perspective. It's like, oh, we get to explore something here, rather than, oh, let's grind down and find the solution. It's more lifting the energy and cooperating in a way that really is nurturing, not only for the soul, but for the human condition of each person in that way. So we found that because we have cross-department satsangs as well. And for instance, there's a bunch of things that are happening right now while we're gone that are incredibly pressing, and we're not there. And I don't answer my emails when I travel that much, so I get away with it. I think Sagar answers his emails more frequently. But there are things lined up when we get back. But even then, it's not like they're pressurized things to work with. It's, so what do we get to do? How do we deal with this? Because one of the questions that Swami Kriyananda trained us to ask is, what is trying to happen here? Isn't that an amazing philosophy? What is trying to happen here? How do we engage in very mundane, detailed stuff at times to find that solution that's trying to come through us? We're not trying to determine the solution. We're trying to open up and tune into what the solution can do through us. That's very radical for a lot of people. I think that's what, Karen, you're relating to, that we come up with tremendous solutions because we're opening to the superconscious realm rather than just the conscious or subconscious realms. And when that happens, we're more fluid. But we're also very solid. And that's an interesting combination, that there's a tremendous solidity. But within that and from that, there's even a more tremendous flexibility and creativity. So we encourage a lot of that to happen, and a lot of it's on the fly. Part of, as I said, what I do is I go around and just check in, or more frequently now, they come to my office. My office door is rarely closed, except when I'm on Zoom calls or meetings or satsangs with others, because it's a nurturing environment that says, yeah, what is trying to happen here? Not, I need to do this, get them to do this for me kind of thing. It's never on that level. It's always, and it's not always easy, and it's not always simple, but it's dynamically rewarding because we're looking at the people and what that can do. Because really, that logo I described of Ananda, we're more intensely involved in that in what we call the Ananda Sangha worldwide part of Ananda, that we're engaged always in touching other people. So we're not only doing this, as I said and Sagar said, for ourselves, but for all these other people. But the dynamics of it are always, one, being thoughtful, introspective, creative, open, and always receptive to possibilities beyond our own perspective. And that creates a tremendous fertile soil for the soul in that soil to really be nurtured and grow a lot. So I don't know if you want to add anything. But it was a wonderful conversation with Karen. She prompted us. So, well, Ananda's focus has been for everyone, householders as well as monastics. I mean, Nayaswami Sagar is one of our monks in our monastery, but it's within the context of the community. So we've never separated that from the community. And Swami Kriyananda, in his time, being a monk with Paramhansa Yogananda, with Self-Realization Fellowship, it wasn't that confining. To a degree, it was more. But so I think there's the real possibility that we might have more of an outward renunciate order that will be more removed. That isn't what's happening currently, but certainly it's hovering as a possibility. It really depends on people involved and what they're drawing from Ananda. And so the step that we've taken is having, so there's a monastery house that Nayaswami Sagar and how many others live? 5 others. And it's been other numbers at different times. As a tremendous experience for that other part that's a little bit more removed. And we've talked about moving them at times to the original property of Ananda, which we call Ananda Meditation Retreat, and maybe that would have fit. We haven't determined that. We're not quite sure. But there's always, again, that sense of liveliness in how do we make it for different people more real, and not just assume everyone's under the same umbrella. I mean, the same umbrella is there of all of Ananda, but within that, there's different perspectives in that way. But we have an order of renunciation. That's why we wear the blue. It's the Nayaswami order, kind of a creative variation from the traditional Swami order of India. But we take vows. We take vows of renunciation, and they're very focused. So we're trying to spearhead a new dynamic expression of renunciation, because as I've mentioned, my wife. So, but we're both Nayaswamis, even though we're married, because we've taken those vows. They're very real and powerful. But as Swami Kriyananda said, that this time we're in now, taking vows of renunciation aren't life rejecting, but samadhi affirming. Samadhi meaning bliss affirming. That's quite a distinct difference, isn't it? We're not rejecting the world. We're aware of that we don't want to be caught by desires and attachments. But our focus isn't on what we don't want to do. The focus is on where we want to go. And be expansive in that renunciation. And really affirming that bliss. So it doesn't quite answer your question, Russell, but it's as best as I can get in the context of giving this information to other people.
And the one thing I might add to that also is the path also changes for that same individual over time. One of the pernicious effects of the way we live right now is we have the same flow of life from the age of 18 or 20 or 22 until pretty much we retire, which is getting pushed further and further because people these days don't like the word retire. But what that means is we are living the same structure of life, the same amount of workout, exercise, hobbies, as we did 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. But as we age, we are supposed to have different interests in life. We are supposed to be dynamic about different things in life. And somehow, because we are on that single track with that single gear, we keep doing the same thing pretty much until we are spent. And a part of a good spiritual community or a good spiritual training is that we realize we have different phases. I might have a dynamic outreach at this point in my life, but I don't necessarily see that being true 10 years from now, 20 years from now. It might be more of an inward life. It might be in a different country. It might be a different role or no outward role. And all of those are important for the soul nature to shine forth. And so a community really allows us to get all those aspects into our experience over a lifetime. It's very important. Yeah, you don't have to be the same person you were 10 years ago, because today that's considered the sign of youth. I'm 70, I'm 80, and I'm still as I was in 60. But why? Then what did you do for 20 years if you are still the same as you were in the age of 60? So anyway, it's just interesting to ponder these questions, right?
I mean, going back to what I said before, that for those that work for Ananda businesses or Ananda part of the outreach, we give this week of seclusion time. That's radical. I mean, it's really a different perspective that we're saying, no, the soul quality of your life, soul, S-O-U-L, is as important as anything that we're doing here for that individual. And we give a lot of support for people to do that, not only me saying, have you taken your seclusion? But also we have suggestions, creative workshops for people to tune into. How does that really happen for you? Because it's not just blanking out. I've often said that in the stages of life, in the yogic tradition, there are four. There's the first stage, the first 24 years or so, called brahmacharya, which is more that being awakened and opening up as a student. And the second phase is typically the householder life, that you have a partner and you perhaps have children. And then after that period of 24 years, you go into the third stage, which is you're still with people, but you're, as Sagar just referred to, you're pulling back more. Well, the fourth stage is where you just pull back. And that hasn't been something at Ananda that we've had. But personally, I feel it being drawn to that in a creative, strong way. But when we take seclusion, we get, it's like we get a taste of that. You know, we're saying, okay, the world at this time for this week isn't my relevancy. My focus is I'm just nurturing my energy with God. And seclusion for different people will mean different things, but for most of it means you're meditating many more hours, but not just out of perseverance, but with joy. Spending more time perhaps doing things like reading spiritual books more, chanting more, doing affirmations more, doing more healing prayers, going for walks in nature. But each person will find their own balance. And then we put on badges when we go out walking. Please excuse me, I'm in silence. We're not engaged. And some people actually avoid eye contact because they're trying to not engage in that outer perspective. And another person's energy for that week is in the focal point. It will be when they come out, even more so than before they went in. But to have that time is a precious commodity of just saying, this week, I'm here for you, God. I'm here with you, Guru. And that's a very empowering tool that we can nurture whatever level of outward renunciation we may find ourselves comfortable with. This nurtures that empowerment of feeling that in the moment. So, very real. So we should probably, because you know what time it is? It's time for tea. So that's an important part of this experience. So, and then we'll come back at 3:30ish, right? And we'll have breakout groups with some different topics. And maybe, Kavita, you can give a little bit of an understanding of that.